the basic way that I came up with the weird ideas that worked for that book was that I looked to see what the research evidence in theory was, and then I looked to see which ideas would enhance variation, vujade, and breaking from the past, and I came up with a set of ideas and stated them in such a way that they might just be a little bit annoying or at least sound weird. And just to give you a feeling for them, what I'll do is I'll give you two of them so you can think about this. The first one is to encourage people to ignore and defy superiors and peers. Now, this is a good illustration of the difference between the logic of routine work and creative work. If somebody is flying the airplane you're on, or you're having a surgical procedure done on you, you don't want people ignoring the head surgeon or the head pilot. But if it's a situation you want creativity, you want variation, then there's an argument that this is a way to get it. And in fact, when we look at survey research, there's a moderate amount of survey research that shows that, that when you ask what kind of supervisors will have the most creative work groups, they tend to be people who devote less attention to the people who work for them and let them break the rules. Conversely, when you go around and nominate who are your most creative people, they're people who bend or break the rules and who ignore and defy authority, sort of like the Stanford faculty, if you want an example of a group that acts like this. So when you start going in industry, there's lots of cases, especially in Silicon Valley, which I know best, where creativity has been done despite rather than because of management. And one case that I studied actually when I first moved back to the Bay Area in 1983 was the Atari Corporation. Atari was very interesting because in the late 70s it was acquired by a movie company, Warner Brothers, and there were all these people who knew anything about the gaming industry. They acquired it and they brought in these people from the movie industry, and they told the game designers to stop designing games and to design things like programs for keeping tracks of recipes. But what ended up happening was that the game designers lied to their bosses about what they were working on and would show them sort of mock-ups of programs for keeping track of recipes and balancing your checkbook and the like, and they kept designing games. And on the back of that defiance, at least for a little while until they got in other trouble, Atari was this enormously successful company. And if you look at the history of gaming, by the way, which always has this sort of illegitimate sort of aspect to it, and you can see this at Microsoft as well for the folks who design DirectX that makes playing games possible. Very often it's something that's done in an unauthorized sort of way. There's lots of organizations that if you start looking at creative organizations that have sort of official policies or procedures that enable this to happen, sort of management by looking the other way or management by getting out of the way. 3M's had the 15% rule for years, that if you're in a technical job, you do work. 15% of your work doesn't have to be authorized. Amazon, 3M, now Google all have sort of work practices that encourage that. And my favorite example from Silicon Valley history, though, comes from Chuck House. And Chuck House is this kind of interesting guy who's actually still around. He actually works for Intel now because his startup got acquired. This was in about 1969, and Chuck was working on an oscilloscope and was actually told directly by David Packard himself to stop working on that dumb idea and to do something else. And what Chuck House did, it was instead of listening to David Packard, he said he was going on a vacation. And what he actually did was he drove around the country and got a couple $1 million worth of orders for this oscilloscope. And in 1969, a couple $1 million was real money. And the result was they made it. It was a successful product. And then in 1981, Chuck House, he got an award from David Packard, and I've forgotten exactly what it says, Extraordinary Contempt Defiance Beyond the Normal Call of Engineering. And Tom Byers and I have seen his resume. It's on his resume. So this is an idea of sort of Packard realizing he had to encourage that kind of thing in the culture. And let me just go through one more, and I'll make sure and leave a good 15 or so minutes for discussion. But another one, which is one of the ones that's sort of more out there, is to not try to learn anything from people who say they've solved the problems you face. I'm a great believer in expertise, and in fact, I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you want to bring some sort of varied ideas and a different perspective in your organization, there's a good argument for bringing in ignorant people and people who know about other things because they're not biased by what's right in the industry and what the solution is. And to give you one of the more famous examples, You've all heard of Jane Goodall, who got famous studying chimpanzees in the wild. She was hired by the famous anthropologist Louis Leakey, and he trained her in field observation methods. She was a young undergraduate, and when she said to Louis Leakey, what I want to do is I want to read the literature now on chimpanzees since I'm going to be spending years of my life studying them in the wild, Louis Leakey wouldn't let her read the literature because it would bias what she saw and didn't see. So there are times when ignorance is very valuable, and I'm not somebody who says ignorance should be done all the time. I think that sort of ignorance and knowledge are tag team partners in life.